Hello, fellow translators. So, a couple days ago, I made a video where I was talking about how nowadays, since there seems to be sort of a lull, let's say, in a lot of people's translation work, that it might be interesting to look into other things. And in particular, there's been a huge increase in people interested in learning new languages. And so, I thought this could be very interesting for people like us. Because presumably all of us, whether we're established freelance translators or just getting started, we speak two languages. And so, maybe we could start teaching a language. So along those lines, I had a conversation with Neil Pyper, who does this, and he teaches on italki. He does this as an extra for extra money. And so we had a discussion. He talked about how to get started on a platform like italki, and how someone like you, who's watching this, someone like us, like a freelance translator, could try to get started on it and try maybe to earn a living through teaching whatever language it might be. So, without any further ado, here's the video. Hello, fellow translators. Here is a different type of video. As you can see, I'm joined here by Neil Pyper. We are going to talk today about teaching English, and more specifically about using italki in order to teach English. So, hi, Neil. First of all, thanks very much for joining me and for sharing
it's a
your
pleasure.
Information. Yeah, so basically, if we could go through, if someone, say like me, who, I speak English and I feel I could teach English as a foreign language, how would someone like me go about this from scratch, basically, in terms of being able to teach English on italki?
Okay, so basically italki is a platform for usually one-to-one language lessons. It has just about every language that you could imagine. To be able to teach a language on italki, you need to speak it at C2 level. However, there are thousands of italki teachers. So what I would say is, while I have seen italki teachers who teach a language other than their native language, it's very, very difficult. I speak Spanish and various other languages, but I've decided to focus on teaching English on italki. And essentially, provided there are openings for teachers of your language, which you can check on the italki website. And by the way, the openings change on a daily basis. So if italki doesn't need English teachers today, it could well need them tomorrow. Essentially what you do is create a profile where you need to write about 100 words about your background, about how you operate as a teacher, and about what lessons are like with you. And then you need to record a 1 to 3 minute video in which you speak the language that you're going to teach. And then essentially that goes to italki. They approve it. I think they say within 20 days. Mine was approved within 24 hours. I've heard of others taking longer. Once they've approved you, then you are able to create between 3 and 6 lesson types, depending on what kind of a teacher you are, which we can get to in a moment, and you can set your availability and pricing. And then essentially you can set your own pricing. There's a minimum, again, depending on whether you're a community tutor or a professional teacher, which we can get into. The minimum price is either $4 or $8 an hour. The maximum price is $80 an hour. So you set your own prices, set your availability, and then italki take a sort of 15% commission on whatever you make.
Okay. So right. So I set it up, and I'll be teaching basically my native tongue, and even if I speak other ones, that'll be the best option.
Yeah, probably.
And so let's say I've set it up and it's been approved by italki.
Yeah.
At this point, I assume there are quite a few other people teaching English or whatever language I'm planning on teaching.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend is the best way, at least when starting out, in order to sort of gain some traction, maybe get your first students?
Yeah, well, okay, first of all, let me talk a little bit about the difference between a community tutor and a professional teacher. Okay. So essentially, a professional teacher has to upload qualifications that show expertise in both languages. Now, that's important. So, I mean, I have a degree and a PhD in Spanish. I don't have any qualifications in English, and I was accepted as a teacher of English on the basis of of degrees in Spanish. Um,
Okay.
so you have to upload qualifications that show expertise in languages and also expertise in teaching or education. So that could be either a TEFL certificate or a teaching license in the US or a PGCE in the UK. And if you can do that, you can become a professional teacher, which in theory means that you offer a more structured curriculum and you can charge higher rates. Anybody who is approved by italki, as far as I can tell, can be a community tutor. A community tutor is essentially somebody who in theory offers less formal, less structured classes, but charges lower rates. Now, as far as I can see, the difference in practice between professional teachers and community tutors is relatively small. So I've seen professional teachers, who charge ridiculously low rates. I've seen community tutors who charge sort of somewhere up near the $80 an hour. And I think the key thing is that essentially you have to differentiate yourself in some way from the many, many other italki teachers of your language. And especially, I mean, in English, there are thousands of teachers. I don't know exactly how many, but probably at least 4,000 or 5,000. So there are a lot of English teachers with a standard EFL profile. So they've got their CELTA or TEFL certificate. Maybe they've worked in language schools, but essentially their profiles are kind of indistinguishable. Whereas, and essentially, if you do that, you pretty much have to compete on price. And there are enough English teachers who are either from low-wage parts of the world or who are currently living in low-wage parts of the world. So the sort of so-called digital nomads, that is a race to the bottom. So I would say, in order to differentiate yourself, it's a bit like translation. You need to draw on the other expertise and skills that you have. So my day job is as a lecturer in a business school at a university in the UK. So essentially what I offer on italki is a combination of business English, but specifically business English that draws on the sort of stuff that I teach in my day job. So strategy tools, leadership models, that sort of thing. I also offer kind of career coaching and things like help with job applications, interview preparation, and I also offer study skills and academic English, and that gets me students who are either currently studying in the UK or looking to study in the UK. So I've managed to carve out quite a nice niche, which means that I'm able to charge a premium for that. So that would be my advice. So if you're a translator specializing in legal translation, for example, it could well be that there's a niche to be carved out in terms of focusing on legal English or whatever language you teach on italki. Likewise for business, likewise for medical, scientific. And it's by doing that basically the people who are charging the higher rates are the people who are able to do that.
Right. Okay, so if I want to set up, and say I want to specialize in like legal and financial, and maybe something along the lines of for people who want to apply to grad school or to college in the US or something. Would that be something? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and then, or maybe if I wanted to specialize in, I only want students who are more advanced, or maybe I only beginners or something. Would that be able to work?
You can do that, yeah. So I only work with advanced students because fundamentally I'm not. I am not an EFL teacher in terms of the kind of traditional profile. So my teaching style works with advanced students. It doesn't work with people who aren't at sort of a high B2 level or above. So you can do that. I mean it's very important in the profile to be very specific about what you do. And if there are any red lines that you won't do, so I don't work with children, for example. I say that in my profile.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so that's interesting. Specify also what you don't do. And so let's say I do this and I'm able to get a student or two. Is there a way for them to leave a review or a rating?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you have a profile on the italki site. The student has the opportunity to leave a review and a rating after each lesson. Now, I don't know about other sites, sort of platform type sites, but on italki, the reviews are out of 5. I've never seen a lower rating for a teacher than 4.9.
Oh, really? Okay.
And
So
the
there's,
overwhelming majority of teachers on italki are 5.
right.
So the rating doesn't mean a huge amount. The reviews, I think, can be important. And once you have, I mean, obviously getting a few reviews is very important in getting established. Once you have a few reviews, you can set up to 3, I think, reviews as testimonials. And it's very important to choose those carefully.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Um,
So, yeah. Sorry.
no, please.
Well, no, no. So I'm just trying to get a picture. So basically,
Yeah,
I would try to get my first maybe 3 students, have them hopefully give me good ratings,
yeah,
and as well as something written, a review that I can then use as a testimonial.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. And it seems to me that when you have these where, yeah, most of the ratings are in the high 4s or 5s, then a big factor will be probably the number of number of ratings rather than the overall score. So if someone has, 1,000 ratings, it looks better than 3 ratings or something like that.
That probably is important. The other thing that people look at a lot on italki is your ratio of lessons to students to see whether
Oh,
you're able to retain students.
oh, that's
So
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so and I think if that ratio is it too high or too low? I can't remember. That
Yeah.
might raise a red flag.
Okay, because I was almost going to say maybe I should find a bunch of different students at the beginning to get a bunch of different ratings and reviews, but maybe that could backfire because it shows that I can't retain students over time.
Yeah, and that links to an interesting debate about whether it's a good idea to set pricing low at the start to get some initial students and get some initial reviews. Now, because this is a kind of secondary income stream for me, I chose not to do that.
Right.
So I have increased my prices over the course of the time that I've been on italki, but I essentially started off with my prices at a level that I thought made it worth my while, and I got
Okay.
students without too much difficulty. So I would argue that you don't need to do that. Now, they didn't do this when I applied, but now, once you're accepted, you have to watch some videos and you have to do a kind of group video conference with somebody at italki before you're allowed to actually teach. And I understand that what they tell people during that group video conference is to start off by setting your prices very
Oh,
low.
really?
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that you need to do that. Particularly if you have some sort of differentiator. And I would imagine that if you have the credentials and experience to be successful as a translator, you probably have the credentials to develop a credible niche on italki.
Right. Also, because if I started off with low prices and then I wanted to raise them, I'd probably presumably lose a bunch of the students that I got before. And so that
Yeah,
would show a high turnover rate, which, as you
it would
mentioned, would,
potentially,
yeah,
show a high turnover rate. I mean, what I think it's important to know about italki is, there are, again, it's highly classified how many students italki has.
oh,
The rumors that I've heard is that it's in the millions.
oh, wow.
So again, even if you have a relatively narrow niche, if there's a total pool of students in the millions wanting to learn English on italki, then potentially, even if your niche is narrow, that's still tens of thousands of students.
Right.
So increasingly, I mean, the way I suspect I've changed my approach on italki over time is, I used to do some of the kind of general English. If people wanted to do that with me for whatever reason. Increasingly now, there's a Facebook community of italki teachers, which is really collegial. And increasingly what I do is I pass off that general English stuff to colleagues who focus on that. And I just do the kind of very specialist, business related and career related and academic stuff that I think I do well. And
Right.
that I think I can do better than the kind of than the kind of generalist EFL teacher, if you like.
Okay. And in fact, actually, because I was going to ask if there is a forum or a place where where people, yeah, get together and chat and share
Yeah.
information. So this Facebook group is that one of the main
The
places?
Facebook group is excellent. There is an official teacher forum on the italki website, which I
Right.
must confess I haven't used very much.
Oh,
I'm not quite sure why. I'm just not in the habit of using it. The Facebook group is excellent.
okay. And do you need to be a teacher to join this Facebook group,
You do.
or?
You
Okay,
need
okay.
to have you need to have a teacher profile.
All right. Okay.
So as soon as you're accepted, essentially as a teacher on italki, then you can join that group.
Okay. I mean, so if you send me the link, I can provide it below, but people can only join once they've become a teacher.
Yeah.
So they can't
Yeah.
join. Yeah.
Yeah. Indeed.
Right. Okay. Okay. And so say now that I want to teach not English, that I'm interested in other languages. Would other languages work in the same manner as English, or are there any differences?
I think it would depend on the language. I mean, I think so. As I said, my main foreign language, if you like, is Spanish.
Right.
And the thing with Spanish and probably Portuguese on italki is that there are an awful lot of very, very cheap Latin American teachers.
Oh,
So my impression is that it's difficult to charge the kind of top end rates for languages where there are a significant number of teachers in kind of low wage parts of the world.
right.
Obviously, people learn English out of kind of economic necessity rather than because it's a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think again that that increases the extent to which people invest in English lessons and are prepared to pay a premium to do that. What I've seen in terms of English is, my rates are at the high end. There is a sort of constituency of italki students that equates price with quality. And I'm not sure that's fair, because I've seen a lot of teachers on the Facebook group who I suspect are very good and are also very cheap.
Yeah.
But basically, people assume that if you pay the rates at the bottom, you're not going to get good quality lessons.
Right.
So I'm a strong advocate, especially if you're well qualified and have something specific to offer, of pricing high. I'm not sure that would work so well with languages that people are learning primarily sort of as a hobby, or because they enjoy traveling to the areas where they're spoken, or things like that.
Right. And this happens, I think, in translation too. All the, people equate obviously the price with quality, but
Yeah.
also that if you have people living in a relatively cheap country, it's gonna, many times the prices are lower than someone who lives in, say, Germany, which tends to be higher price, and that's just due to supply rather than demand, if you will. And so yeah, there are quite a few factors, and it seems like there's similarities there as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say, sort of, I suppose this might be tangential, but in my experience, italki students like working with people who are multilingual, who've had experience of learning languages to a high level.
Okay.
So I think, I assume that somebody watching this who's interested in translation will be that.
Okay.
And that's something to definitely make a lot of in a profile.
Okay.
So on my italki profile and video, I speak in Spanish on the video, and I write a couple of lines in Spanish on the profile.
Right.
I did that expecting, my academic expertise is in Latin America, and I expected that demand for my services on italki would come from Latin America. It doesn't. There are hardly any, in my experience, Latin American potential students who are prepared to pay my rates. Almost all of my italki students are in Russia or surrounding countries.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, the fact that they hear me speaking Spanish convincingly is something that draws them to me.
Right.
So I think that's an important thing to emphasize to the sort of people who I assume would be watching this video.
Okay, that is interesting, actually, because I saw your profile video, and your Spanish, the accent as well was impeccable, so I could see how someone would be impressed. That's interesting that it attracts people from other nations as well, though.
Yeah. And I also think, again, I would assume that a lot of people working in translation have higher degrees.
Right.
The sort of italki students who are prepared to pay the high rates love higher degrees.
Yeah.
Basically, that's not to say that that's essential, but it's a real asset if you have it.
Right. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. And so these classes that you teach, are they all one-on-one, or is there a possibility to do a group class or anything along those lines?
My classes are all one-on-one. Italki, as far as I know, allows group classes, and I know people who do it, but it's tricky because basically Italki's platform doesn't allow group classes unless the student forms the group and organizes payment.
Oh.
So there's nothing to stop you doing group classes on italki, but it's relatively difficult. And it would have to be groups of people who know each other.
Okay, so would this mean, I mean, so if your rate is a certain amount, would each student pay that rate, or would that just be divided between the students?
Basically what happens is a student has to put money on their italki account. There has to be enough money on their italki account to cover any lessons that they book. They book the lesson, they have the lesson. Assuming everything goes okay, they confirm that the lesson has happened, and then that credit is transferred to the teacher.
Okay, so it's held in escrow, basically.
So it's held in escrow. Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And as far as in fact, I'm sure because I have friends who are looking to do group lessons. There is no way of there's no way of having each student pay separately.
Okay.
Which makes group lessons tricky.
So just so I understand, so say your rate is say $10 an hour,
yeah,
and you have 2 students. Would each one of those be paying $10 an hour, or would each one be paying $5? Like, would
no one of the students would book the lesson.
Oh, okay, and then the other one would just join in.
And then the student would pay from their italki account, right. And it would be between the students to work out how the payment's divided, which is why group lessons on italki don't really work. People offer them, but they don't really work.
Okay, because then the student, so this, if I were a student, then the other person would have to be, or they could add their own video, but it would.
I mean, there would be nothing to stop you using a video conferencing platform with multiple people, but the students would need to arrange payments. So if it was $10, right. One of the students would have to send the other $5.
Right. Okay.
If you see what I mean.
Got it. Okay, so that would be a bit complicated. Yeah. But yeah, just to see more or less how it works.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody's watching this and has experience of doing group classes on italki, it would be interesting to hear. But one of the reasons why, I mean, there's a big debate among online English teachers about the merits of working on a platform like italki versus trying to work independently. A big reason why a lot of people set up or try to work independently, sometimes as well as on italki, is to facilitate group lessons.
Okay.
In my experience.
Okay, so that makes sense. So in a way, you could almost, like if you start getting some traction and getting some recognition on italki, you could use that profile if you want to do your own thing later on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing that a lot of italki teachers do, which is likely to be relevant to your viewers, is they offer things like proofreading, and I've seen some people. Seen some people offer translation.
Oh wow!
So basically, they have a lesson type on italki, and if you book a 1-hour lesson at however many dollars per hour, that gets you say 1,500 words of proofreading. Or 500 words of translation. So I've seen that, and I think particularly for proofreading, I think some people are quite successful at offering that through italki.
Oh, they're kind of. I mean, I'm not gaming the system, but yeah, finding a way to.
Yeah. And enough people. I've seen enough italki teachers doing that it can't be something that's going on under the radar.
Right. I mean, I guess if everyone's happy with the situation, why not? Okay, but that is interesting. So, and these are just preliminary things for people who want to first get started. Are there any other tips or tricks that you would recommend for people to, I don't know, stand out or to facilitate the onboarding process, let's say?
I think the video is incredibly important.
Okay.
So I would say, I mean, it's interesting. I've seen italki teachers who've paid sometimes quite a lot of money for professional videos, and that's
Oh,
put people off. At the
yeah.
same time, if your video doesn't do what it needs to do in terms of selling you and what you offer as something that people want to work with, then then you're not going to get students, essentially. So I would say, making sure that the video is well shot, that it conveys the image that you want to convey. So, for example, this is my home office.
Right.
My differentiator on italki is that my day job is as an academic.
Right.
So the books and things in the background are deliberate.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of students book with me and comment about having seen the books in the background. And,
Okay.
so I thought very carefully about how I did my video.
Right.
And I looked into paying someone to do it. I decided to do it myself, but use decent equipment and
Right.
have a go. It's the only video I've ever edited in my life, and have a go at editing it properly.
Right.
And my video seems to have worked. Very often, when people register on italki and they're not getting students, redoing their video fixes it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I would say that the profile on italki, I suspect very few students actually read unless they're already interested in working with you. So the profile is important because of SEO,
Right.
so that, and one thing that italki has been very good at for me is sending me students that are a good fit. So
Okay.
I don't know how they do it, but they they do something so that the right people see my profile.
Okay.
So the profile, I think, is important in terms of having the right, I guess, keywords to describe your niche. The thing that will make people book with you or not is your video. So
Okay.
overwhelmingly, people watch the video. If they don't like what they see in the video, that's that.
Yeah.
If they do like what they see in the video, they might glance at your profile. But I suspect a lot of people book lessons while barely reading the profile. And the other thing that I would say, I was talking to a guy on the Facebook group a couple of days ago who has really good work experience as a biologist and a master's degree in biology. Didn't mention that on his profile.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, because he'd done a sort of an EFL qualification and essentially was trying to sell himself as a mainstream EFL teacher. And I would say, again, a bit like translation,
Yeah.
and any other relevant qualifications that you have that make you stand out and that
Yeah.
allow you to offer a niche. I've seen all sorts of niches. I've seen teachers on italki who offer. There was one woman who offered English for dating,
Oh,
apparently
really?
quite successfully. Yeah, I've heard of people successfully offering Bible study courses in English
Oh,
on italki. There are all sorts of niches.
yeah.
The point is that to be able to charge the sort of rates that make it worthwhile,
Right.
you need to find some way of differentiating yourself, and you need to make sure that comes across crystal clear in your video.
Right. Okay. And then, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense what you said, that it's not worth getting a professional to do a video because that could backfire, because
Yeah,
that's usually not what people want to
yeah.
see in a teacher.
Yeah. On the other hand, a video sort of shot on the fly on your phone without any thought and ad-libbed and will not work.
Yeah.
So
No.
the video is important.
Right.
That's the sort of shot window, if you like.
Yeah. No, and I say that to a lot of translators too when they do an introduction video. You want to spend a lot of time, but it should not look like professional. It should look,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you say, you have the
Exactly.
books there on purpose. But yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also for matching. So for matching, italki will find potential students for you, but they are the ones who get in touch with you, or do you get in touch with them?
So what normally happens is students. So there's a website. There's what I think is now a very good app. Students find you, they book a lesson. When a student books a lesson, you get a ping on your app. italki are very strict about how you have to respond to all lesson requests.
Right.
You don't have to accept all lesson requests, but you have to respond within, I think it's 48 hours.
Right.
So you get a ping on the app, you either accept or don't the lesson request.
Mhm.
the lesson happens. After the lesson happens, the student confirms that it's completed, and you get paid.
Right.
I've never, there are teachers who actively market themselves and have Facebook pages and websites and things like that. I've never done that, and I've always had a reasonably steady stream of students.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, for me, the 15% that italki takes is well worthwhile. Because essentially I don't have to do any marketing.
Right.
I don't have to do any administration of payment. I don't have to chase payment. I
Yeah.
hear horror stories about payment in translation. That's not an issue on italki. You just get paid. There are money transfer fees because you withdraw your earnings from italki either using PayPal or Payoneer. That's a bit of a nuisance, but it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But for me, the sort of taking care of marketing and of payment means that the 15% that italki take is well worth it as far as I'm concerned.
Sorry, 15%.
15%.
Right,
Yeah,
115. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's more than justified. Usually whenever you have an escrow, it's worth it. Because it simplifies many things.
And like I say, italki, for me, italki have been very good at like I say, I've checked this morning. I've worked with 80 students over the course of the year that I've been working on italki. Of those 80, I've had 2 or 3 that have just been a terrible fit.
Really?
Where there's been one lesson and it was just obvious that it wouldn't work. 2 or 3 out of 80 is pretty good.
Yeah.
So however they match potential students with teachers, it works, right, in my experience.
And so, but it's always the students getting in touch with you. It's never you getting in touch with a student and be like, oh, I would be a great teacher for what you're looking for.
They introduced a facility recently called Lesson Invitation, which allows you to do that. I haven't done it. You can see, I didn't realize this until someone told me a week or so ago, you can see a list of students who've looked at your profile.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So you could do that. Personally, I'm not sure about whether that's a good idea. I use the lesson invitation feature. Essentially, there's a calendar, you create your availability. You can set your own availability. There are no minimums and maximums, but it's a very big deal if you miss lessons.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So you can't cancel a lesson once it's been booked unless the other person agrees to the cancellation.
Right.
And if you miss 3 lessons, you get kicked off the platform.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So because I have a day job that is my absolute priority, my availability is often quite limited.
Right.
I sometimes use the lesson invitation feature to arrange a lesson with a regular student outside of my normal availability. Okay. And I find it useful for that. I've never used it to market directly to students.
Right.
I guess you could. It may be that some people have done that successfully. Like I say, I haven't needed to. I've always had a fairly steady stream of lesson requests. Okay.
Yeah, but it also seems like it could be a pain. It could be almost spammy if you're just contacting random students. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely, it could be. Although, as I say, there is a way of seeing who's been looking at your profile.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you can just pick from there.
Yeah. And incidentally, italki is also a platform that people can use to arrange language exchanges. So one of the things that can be a bit of a nuisance is people contacting you looking for a language exchange.
Right.
In other words, free lessons.
Right. Exactly.
I don't get a lot of that, but I've had a few of those requests over the past year.
Okay. And so what, you just politely declined basically, and
I politely declined at the beginning. Now I just ignore. I have to confess.
But you said you're supposed to respond to every request, right?
No, if a student sends a lesson request, that basically says I want a lesson at this date and time.
Oh, okay.
That's different. So the lesson request, it's a bit like a ping on Uber.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You either accept or decline it.
Right.
And once you accept it, it goes into your calendar on the app. Anybody can message you. So there's a messenger system in the app. You don't have to reply to.
Okay, I got it. Yeah.
You don't
So,
have to reply to messages. I reply. You can tell if somebody who messages you is a potential student, and I reply if they look like a potential student.
right.
I don't reply if they don't.
Right. That makes sense. Um, yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much it on my part. I think that you gave a good broad overview for people who want to get started. Is
Mm.
there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I mean, one thing that I was going to say was that, you know, if you want to be a professional teacher rather than a community tutor, it's relatively quick and relatively inexpensive to do a 120-hour TEFL certificate. There are lots of online options available, and potentially, you know, having the professional teacher
Right.
stamp, if you like, is potentially helpful. I looked at italki's requirements just before we spoke today, and they appear to have tightened up on
Oh,
which 120 hour TEFL certificates they accept. So, you know, if you go to Groupon, you can do these things for $20.
yeah.
Now, they're not very good, and you don't learn very much, but at the end of it, you get a certificate that
Right.
says 120-hour TEFL. It used to be that you could basically do that, and on the back of that, italki would accept you as a professional teacher.
Okay, but now they're cracking down a bit.
They seem to be cracking down on that,
Yeah.
but there are, like, for example, there's one by a company called TEFL.org, which is about £150, so
Right.
$180, something like that.
Yeah.
They've always accepted that one. And it might be, and unlike the ones on Groupon, that one actually teaches you something,
Yeah.
by all accounts.
Yeah.
It might be worth doing that in order to get the professional teacher credential, and also just so that you know what you're doing when
Yeah.
you have a teacher sitting in front of you. You know, so getting some sort of teaching qualification that will give you a start is not difficult, I don't think.
Okay, and I mean, and the TEFL obviously would be for English, but I assume the same would work for equivalents in other languages if someone's teaching a different language.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of different TEFL certificates available.
Okay.
You know, everything from the kind of five. You see them for $5 on Groupon,
Right.
and then the reputable ones, the kind of Cambridge Celta and things like that, are
Yeah.
more like $2,000.
Oh, wow.
You know, and then there's everything in between. I'm not sure how wide a range of qualifications there are for other languages, but that might be worth doing. And also, they accept, you know, if so. For example, I have a teaching qualification that I got as a university teacher. They accepted that alongside my degree in Spanish.
Okay.
So, you know, if you're teaching even sort of as an adjunct at a university, it may be that there's some sort of qualification that you can get quite quickly.
Okay.
They will accept some references from employers in lieu of qualifications. You know, so it's so a letter from a school saying that you've been teaching English for X number of years potentially is acceptable in lieu of a qualification.
Okay, that's interesting. So there is some flexibility.
So there is some flexibility,
Right.
yeah. And I suspect, like I say, I see community tutors who charge very high rates. I see professional teachers who charge low rates. At the same time, I suspect that there are probably quite a lot of students out there who would prefer to work with a professional teacher.
Right. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that seems like a great overview, at least for people, you know, starting out and who can get started. So once again, this was a brief discussion on how to get started with italki. I don't want to do it too long, but I think we covered the main points for starting off. So if people have any questions, you can leave the questions in the comments below.
I'm happy to answer questions if people
Okay,
leave them in
perfect.
the comments.
Then okay, yeah. So you can leave the comments below, and Neil can reply to any questions you might have, because I won't be very helpful with that. That's pretty much it. Thank you once again for joining us.
Pleasure.
And that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, thanks. Bye. Savedum.